Hi, I'm Ann Sittner Anderson. I'm the Communications Coordinator at the Minnesota Commission of the Deaf, DeafBlind, and Hard of Hearing.
Hi, I'm Andrew Palmberg, and I'm here as a representative for TDAC, known as Travelers with Disabilities Advisory Committee at the airport. I represent the Minnesota Commission for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing on this committee. Today, we would like to talk to you about what TDAC is, what TDAC does, and why TDAC matters to you.
Plus, we are going to share our experiences with crash simulations. Please enjoy our presentation.
I joined TDAC back in 2014. I work here at the Commission, MNCDHH, and Mary Hartnett asked me if I wanted to join the airport's committee to advise the airport on how to make the airport more accessible for people with disabilities. I had an interest in this because I love airplanes and transportation, and I also have an architectural background. So I said I'd be happy to join, and I started in 2014. I became the chairperson of that committee in 2015 and have been involved to this day. TDAC is an acronym for the Travelers with Disabilities Advisory Committee set up at the Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport. It was set up in 2014 by Phil Burke. He was the director of the Minneapolis-St. Paul operations. He had an interest in making the airport more accessible for people with disabilities. Our motto is to promote equitable access for all airport users. I'd like to share how we do that. We have members on the TDAC committee who are deaf, blind, deafblind, people with muscular dystrophy. We also have people with autism. There are several disability groups represented on that committee. And we meet about 4 times a year to discuss accessibility topics at the airport. They want us to think about and give feedback. We provide feedback, and the airport decides to establish a new policy or a new service to make the airport more accessible. Since 2014, we have been continuing to work on improving the airport, and hopefully we will continue doing that in the future. Minneapolis-St. Paul Airport has improved accessibility in many ways. Some examples include video remote interpreting, VRI, at all information booths at the airport. Staff members can also use their tablet to connect with a video remote interpreter and use that service to speak with deaf or hard of hearing customers who use sign language to communicate. Staff members can help them find restaurants, restrooms, or additional help. The airport has that accessibility now. Secondly, all restaurants are required to have TV captions on. The airport has also improved the rest area for service dogs to make it more beautiful and more efficient. So more people feel comfortable using that space for their service dog. Fourthly, video relay service, VRS is coming soon. It's a phone service for people who use sign language, and they can use this service at the airport. Again, this is coming soon. These examples are how the airport has improved accessibility. If you notice any accessibility issues or you have comments on how to make the airport more accessible, please contact the Minnesota Commission for Deaf and Hard of Hearing at the email address below. The Commission will inform me, and I'll be able to bring up these issues at the airport at our next meeting. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about crash simulation. It's a simulated Air Force crash at the Minneapolis-St. Paul Airport. And they do this to train firefighters, policemen, and ambulance responders on how to respond to a crash, and also to train outside firefighters to respond to help outside the airport to help with staff. The training exercise is also required by the Federal Aviation Administration and requires that this training be done every 3 years. That exercise also helps train the airport staff and public affairs team because the newspaper and TV reporters arrive at the airport to find out why the plane crashed, the details, how many people survived, and then this practice can be applied to how the airport can best respond to those situations. It also trains staff members who are trained in helping survivors from that plane crash. It helps them find the next flight, the next hotel room, and it also helps them find their car if they're unable to find it. That's why the airport does this training every 3 years as required by the FAA.
One day, Andrew contacted the commission and said the airport wants a deaf person to volunteer for the crash simulation. I volunteered because I viewed it as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to do that. So Andrew sent me all the information that I needed to know as far as where to go and what time to check in. I showed up and showed my ID and went along the check-in process. My role that I was given for the simulation was as a survivor, an uninjured survivor. So I went into the orientation where they explained all the rules and told us what to expect. The airport hired an interpreter for me, but the interpreter only covered before and after the simulation because I needed to have a real life experience so I would know what my interpreter would be like if I was on the plane and obviously would not have an interpreter. So I took the bus to where the crash simulation was happening, which was on the runway field. And there was an old plane there. I moved along with my group and noticed some of the people there had a role of an injured person, so they sat around with some injuries. Other people had died, so they laid down as if they were dead, and I was a survivor, so I waited. And I waited the longest because I was not injured. When the firefighters arrived, they saw all the smoke. The first thing they did was spray water from the truck to put out the fire. And it was cool to see the firefighters in action. I had no idea how much water the trucks could hold. Then, after the fire was put out, the firefighters came around the ashes to ask questions of who was injured, who is the survivors, and they grouped everyone together in their correct categories. I waited and looked around, but I felt really lost without information. And I think that would be a real-life experience of a survivor, looking around, unsure of what's happening and what's going on. When you contact a police officer or firefighter, you use gestures. Some wrote notes, and others were more creative for communication. One firefighter asked around, "Anyone have a pen and paper?" It was interesting to see, with my experience interacting with the different emergency responders, how each person handled it. One firefighter came up to me speaking, and I gestured that I couldn't understand. So they just held my hands across over my head. I didn't know what that meant, and later found out it meant that I was not injured. So there was a lot of waiting because I was an uninjured survivor. I observed them assessing and taking care of the injured survivors first, and finally, when it was my turn to ride the bus to the Survivor Center, they had Red Cross volunteers, food, and water, and they sat me down and wrote on a piece of paper telling me that they would have an interpreter for me. For that, I envisioned an in-person interpreter, a live interpreter coming, but I found that they used a laptop instead, and that connected me to a video remote interpreter, which was actually my first time using the VRI system. Now I remember thinking, okay, this is a good backup to have, to use the video remote interpreter. But I think if I was a little kid, or if I was deafblind, or if I was emotional, then VRI probably would not work, and they would need another backup in that situation. So when we were finished, they thanked me and they let me go. And that's the story of my experience. I know you have a lot more experience to share with this, Andrew.
Yes, I've had two experiences with crash simulations. One was in 2015 and also more recently in 2018. In 2015, I had the same experience as Anne. I became the survivor on the field and pretended that my arm was broken. The first time I did that, I was unsure what to expect. Like Anne, I experienced riding a bus out to the old aircraft. I got off, I walked, and I waited. When the exercise started, I saw a fire truck drive up and spray water around the airplane. It was really cool. After that was over, firefighters went out to where the survivors or victims were. The firefighters checked each person and then approached me. I signed that I was deaf and that I asked what they were saying. And the firefighter was a little bit awkward and didn't know what to do. They needed help. And during that exercise, they pretended that there was an interpreter there. So the interpreter, an in-person interpreter, translated for the firefighter to me. And for that first year, that was Minneapolis, St. Paul's first time they invited a person with a disability. They wanted to start getting experience before adding more opportunities to be more accommodating. And that's why they had an interpreter that first year. And during that experience, it felt like it was almost not quite a real life scenario, but it gave the firefighters an interesting experience trying to figure out what to do. And the plane was from Amsterdam. So what happens in that scenario if there's a person on that plane who doesn't speak English? It was a similar concept to being in my situation, so it was a very good experience for those first responders to address the language and communication issue. For the second time I was involved in 2018, the airport involved a deaf person, which was Anne, and also a blind person who also had a service dog with him. So the airport has had experience with a service dog and then also with this person acting as a role as a survivor. My role in this example was an observer, was to watch everything, to watch how first responders interacted with Anne and also with the person who was blind. My job was to report on what I noticed, what the airport did, and what they could do better for next time. all these ideas could help the airport improve. And I did all this at the 2018 crash simulation.
You may be asking why it's important to include people with disabilities. Well, 1 in 5 people here in the United States has a disability. Many people with disabilities do experience things like car accidents, hurricanes, earthquakes, and plane crashes. So it's a good experience during training, almost like developing muscle memory and having a better idea of what to do and how to manage that. So it would be a good experience for the emergency responders to also think about communication barriers and what can be done to address them. I'm very happy and appreciate that the airport included people with disabilities in this training exercise. I think it's important, and I'm hoping in 3 years they'll include deaf-blind people in the training exercise as well. I'm letting you know about that right now, Andrew.
Okay, I look forward to that in 3 years. Also, I think it's important to include people with disabilities because now we have baby boomers. For those people who are maybe getting a little bit older in age, are now almost over the age of 60, there will be a growing population of people with disabilities or are in need of additional assistance. Also, my comments from the previous question could apply. What would happen if a person who doesn't communicate in English is involved in this crash? How would they get access to information, communicate their injury? Do they need help? How does this interaction take place? People with disabilities, for example, deaf people, can inform first responders how to interact with people who don't communicate well in the way that they're used to or in a different language.
That's exactly right. Thanks for watching the interview, and hopefully you learned from and benefited from this presentation as we shared about our experiences with the crash simulations, and you've learned more about TDAC.
The Minneapolis-St. Paul Airport is still improving accessibility. If you have ideas, opinions, please contact the Minnesota Commission for Deaf and Hard of Hearing, and the Commission will let me know on how I can share your thoughts on what we can do to improve. Thank you.